the opening lines are, Jonathan was born on the 31st of the 10th, 1984. Both parents were horrified by the child's appearance. Both parents felt no maternal bond. Both parents left the hospital 36 hours later, leaving the child behind. And at that point, they left me because I looked different. They left me because I looked like this, and it destroyed me.
Obviously, we've met you before, Jono, but for people, viewers or listeners for the first time, could you just explain to me who you are?
Oh, God. My name's Jono Lancaster. A lad from West Yorkshire. And still discovering who I am and exploring a lot of things that I love about myself and exploring the things that I love in the world too. There's a lot more to it than that, but yeah.
It's a nice explanation. It's something that we're all doing, I suppose, aren't we?
I think as I've got older, I become very, very, very careful with my language that I use when I come to explaining who I am and my story and my situation, because I think those words can really have, or they do have an impact on my general well-being. So when I do interviews and I share my story, I'm finding it very interesting how to navigate speaking about truths, but also being kind to myself while speaking about those truths.
Do you mean by that when you're talking about, say, an introduction to yourself, how you introduce yourself can start to be how you define yourself?
Definitely. I mean, I could introduce myself as Jono Lancaster with a facial difference. People have heard my backstory about my birth parents, and I could introduce myself as that. Very, very careful on how I do that, because what you say often becomes what you are, if you're not careful. So, yeah, Jono Lancaster, lad from West Yorkshire.
Could you explain to me what Treacher Collins Syndrome is?
Yes, Treacher Collins is something that you're born with and affects your face. So for me, it does affect individuals differently. So for me, I don't have any cheekbones, so that's why my eyes appear the way they do. I've got my little Bart Simpson ears, which I absolutely love, but it means I am hard of hearing, so I do wear a hearing aid. My jaw is underdeveloped, so for me, that just means I snore really loud, but for others, unfortunately, they do need help with their breathing, so they'll have a trach. Some may need a feeding tube. Some require a lot of surgeries just to be able to get by in life. Whereas all my surgeries were more around my hearing. And it just affects people's faces in different ways.
So the primary effect, is it like a skeletal thing that it affects? Is it bone or is it everything?
It's bone.
Right.
So if you see an X-ray of somebody with Treacher Collins, the characteristics are quite similar, and you'll notice that there are features there that are missing or underdeveloped, and it's really, really cool actually to see a skull of somebody with Treacher Collins. But yeah.
Okay. One thing I want to be conscious of is you've just spoken very eloquently there about being careful about how you define yourself. Obviously, a lot of this conversation might be the impact that having Treacher Collins has had on your life so far, but we spoke out there. If there's anything that you just feel uncomfortable with, or any language I use that's not right, please feel free to correct me.
I absolutely appreciate you sharing that. And again, when the LADbible, it's amazing to hear that the people who tune into LADbible wanted to know more. It's a platform that covers a big wide audience of people with differing views and opinions and backgrounds, and it's pretty amazing to be back to share more of what people wanted to know. So yeah, let's get into it.
Great. When did you first realise that you had something that set you apart from other people?
Ooh, that's a tough one to answer. I think I naturally celebrated my differences from a really early age. I was adopted when I was 5, and we had a party. It was my gotcha day where I found my forever family, my forever home. And on the 18th of May, every year we celebrated the day where my mum went to the hospital, and out of all those babies there, my mum chose me. And nobody else had that. Everybody else had a regular birthday, whereas I got these 2 celebrations, and I naturally celebrated that. And then as a child, in early school, I was the only one that had a hearing aid, and I would tell all the kids that if it got wet, it would blow up. With the little buttons on my hearing aid, I could do maths and I could cheat on my homework and stuff. So I naturally celebrated my differences, and me and Mum would always come down to Great Ormond Street Hospital for my surgeries, and I couldn't wait to go back to school and talk about my adventures with Mum at Piccadilly Circus and Covent Garden and going to various museums. And so I've always known there were differences there, and I celebrated them. My mum never hid anything. There was, at an early age, there was open conversation using language that I understood the best that I could.
And were you somebody who, from the beginning, you realised you were fostered and you were aware of what that meant, or was that something there was a conversation about later on down the line?
I was fostered at first, while there was a decision of what was best for my future going forward. And so I would always challenge my mum. What does fostering mean? What does adoption mean? Why are you so old? Was, my mum adopted me in her 40s.
Right.
So, we'd go football training, and all my mates would have their young mums and dads there, and I'd have my little old mum there. And people were like, what's your grandma doing here? And I was like, that's me mum. And so I would why are you old? And why aren't you married? What happened to my mum and dad? And then Jean, she always tried to word it the best she could. They struggled to cope with you. They struggled to take you down to the hospital all the time. And I was like, oh, okay. And I accepted it as a child. And then as I got older, things weren't clicking. And I was like, hold up, you're a single mum in your 40s. How are you able to take me to Great Ormond Street? And those two can, and they're younger, and what is it that they couldn't cope with? And the conversations became harder, and I challenged her more because I think as I was getting angrier, I was getting conflicted and confused, and there was negativity creeping in, and the pieces weren't going where they once were. And
what age was this, would you say, when you're talking about, changing your sort of attitude towards it?
I think the big turning point for myself was going up into high school.
Right.
Up until high school, I had a very nice circle. So I would go to school with kids that knew me from very small. There were no changes in the school environment. The school club, the after-school clubs that I would go to were local kids that had seen me on the street. And I had a very close-knit, safe environment. My world was very safe. And then when I went up to high school, all of a sudden, all these other schools kind of merged as they do with going to high school. And then all of a sudden, there's all these kids that hadn't seen me before. I was exposed to the older kids. And then all of a sudden, the pointing, the name calling, kids pulling their eyes down towards me, just laughing at me. That's when I started my differences weren't cool anymore. I weren't able to celebrate them. I weren't able to brag about my hearing aid or my ears and or make a joke about my mum going to the hospital and choosing me. I weren't able to talk about those things anymore because people started to use them against me. And high school was a big, big turning point for a lot of people. But for me, that's when it hit me.
And was it a shock Was it something that you hadn't realised could be seen as a negative thing? Or were you just kind of like, okay, this is just a different situation?
I had experienced negativity before I went to high school. Me and Mum would come down to London and I would notice people, on the tube, they'd be staring, and there were a couple of incidents where people were laughing at me and my mum challenged them.
So what was the kind of, when you got into high school and you started to experience this kind of slightly different attitude towards you to what you'd been accustomed to, was it then you mentioned earlier about starting to get more angry, potentially being more negative. Was that then basically a direction that you started to travel in, or would it be kind of peaks and troughs?
The first 2 years at high school were definitely peaks and troughs. If there's teenagers watching this, we all can relate to some of the feelings and things that they're going through, especially when it comes to trying to fit in and relationships, making friendships and finding who we are. So it is tough for every single one of us. And I think now with social media, and we're still in this world that's obsessed with image and looks and trying to fit in and trends and everything. And it's getting even harder, I think. But yeah, if you do throw in a difference as well, whatever difference it is, things can become harder. And I think one of the things that I really struggled was I started talking about relationships going forward, and then I started thinking about my birth parents, and I'm not really given them much thought. I'd give them a lot of thought, but not as in the whys. And it was just like, oh, they're just two people. And I'd created a backstory of my birth parents. My birth parents both had blonde hair, blue eyes. My dad played guitar, my mum sang, and they sang love songs, and they were all happy, and they just couldn't love me, or they did love me, but they couldn't live with me just because of circumstances. And I'd been given to Jean, and I'd found my forever family, and everything was okay, and that celebration. And then as I reach in my teenage years and I start thinking about relationships, all of a sudden I'm thinking about my birth parents. Your birth parents are supposed to love you and support you no matter what. And the fact that mine weren't able to do that for me, and I'm thinking about these relationships and girls, I'm like, how's anybody going to love me? How's anybody going to find me attractive when I look like this? And the dark thoughts and the negativity just became so consuming. And all the outlets that I once had, my friends, my mum, family, the specialists at Great Ormond Street Hospital, I pushed them all away. And all these feelings and all these emotions, I just bottled them up and thought with them. And, even my thoughts around my birth parents, I wanted to hurt them as much as I was hurting. And that backstory that I had for them, it was still there, but the blonde hair had faded, the skin had got more wrinkled, and they sang songs around pain and anger, and they weren't doing so great in life, and that's why we got separated. But yeah, a lot of dark thoughts in high school, back end of high school. They were my thoughts, and it all stemmed around relationships and being what I thought I was unattractive.
So when you're moving through high school at this point, and you're thinking about relationships and this kind of thing, are you still, you're getting these kind of dark thoughts you've described, are you still managing to keep groups of friends around you? Have you still got good mates, or are you sort of pushing people away a little?
I soon became a person who people pleased, and I became a person with no boundaries, because all of a sudden I started questioning why people would hang out with me, because I looked different. And I'm like, I must pay them back some way. And as an early memory, I would go to the shop on lunch, and my mum would give me like £5, and I would buy a cucumber sandwich for 35 pence, or a beetroot and mayonnaise sandwich for 35 pence. And the rest of the money that I saved, I would buy sweets, chocolate, drinks, and I would just give them out to all my friends.
Right.
And then when we started drinking and going to parties, I felt like I had to entertain. I would end up doing stupid things, but I felt like I had to do those things for them to be my friends. And I remember throughout various times in life, the odd friend pulling me to one side and like, Jono, you don't have to do that. You're one of the boys. We love you. But for me, I didn't get it. I didn't feel it. I felt like I had to do something to keep people in my life. And as I've got older, I've also realised that I do that in relationships as well, which is very dangerous.
So you moved on through school and into college. And at what point was it that, because, you know, I've seen you talk about drinking and, you know, the things where things started going, the times when things started going slightly off the rails. What caused that and where did that start?
Year 10 of high school, my friends started having these parties, and I knew they existed, and everybody was invited. It was like an open invitation. And I remember waiting outside a class, and one of my friends was like, "Oh, you're coming to the party this weekend, Jono? You haven't been to one yet." And I was like, "Oh, I've not been invited." And I'm like, "Shut up, everybody's invited, you know, you want it, boys, come." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I didn't know what happened at these parties. I didn't know what to expect. It was just, this was new.
Was it like a house party or in the woods? Or
a house party.
House party. Parents
go away, house party. So bought a new outfit. I was terrified of the hairdressers at this point. I hated that celebration of who I was. That stopped in high school. And as the celebration stopped, I stopped looking at my face. There were times I looked at my face and I would push my eyes up, and I believe that if I had my eyes, it were always my eyes, if my eyes were like yours, like everybody else's, if I had a normal face, I wouldn't be going through all these shit things that were happening to me. And I got angry that I couldn't change my face. So stopped looking in the mirror. Even just the reflection of my face as I'm walking down the high street in a window, it was like a reality check that I looked different. And I was like, oh. And I was struggling. And the parties and I heard stories where people were playing spin the bottle.
Yeah.
And there was relationships building, drinking and stuff like that. And I was like, and I was terrified of that. So I got a new outfit for this party. I'm terrified of the hairdressers, so I gave myself this shit wonky bowl cut.
By yourself?
By myself, yeah. Inspired by Nick Carter, David Beckham, you know, back in the day. It was terrible. And that was the only thing that I could do to try and sort my hair out, sort of thing. So I cut my hair, got a new outfit, went to the local shop, bought a bottle of Teacher's whiskey. My first party. Everybody else were buying cans of Special Brew, Skull, and white light inside, yeah. And we go to this house party, and I'm sat there, and at the start of it was fine. There were a few lads playing on a PlayStation, people were smoking, and everybody were talking. And I was just sat there with my bottle of whiskey, and I just didn't know what to do. And then the girls started arriving, and then all of a sudden, I'm not having conversations with the lads anymore. You know, the PlayStation's gone off, and they're talking to the girls, and I'm like, and then I'm just sat there on my own, like, oh, what do I do? And I just opened the bottle of Teacher's whiskey and just downed the bottle of Teacher's whiskey, and I don't remember anything else of that first party. But then on the Monday, everybody started talking about, oh, Jono downed a bottle of whiskey. And I loved it. I loved that attention. And all of a sudden, I'm included in stories. And I wasn't buying anything for them, but it's still people pleasing. It's still not setting any boundaries.
At that age, I guess it's like, oh, what a legend.
Yes, 100%. So all of a sudden, that period of my life then became, what can I do to entertain? What can I do to keep these friendships? And it didn't work on the girls. And, you know, I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't have a girl that found me attractive, or there were nothing like that. And I would write girls' love poems, and I would save my pocket money, and I'd buy them a necklace and stuff. And I felt like I had a crush on every girl at some point in life, and it just never happened. And that would just eat away at me and just crush me. And
were they unkind to you?
No, they weren't unkind to me. And so I had a group of friends in all these parties. They fancied other people, and they were in relationships with other people. They weren't unkind. There was no, like, Jono, you're an amazing guy. And there were no, my group of friends and the people that all went to those parties, there were nothing but friendship there. And yes, there were times when girls would ask me out as a dare or as a joke, but that weren't my friendship group. They were like girls from a year below or year above. Or if me and my friends would go shopping at the weekend, there'd be girls that I'd say stuff when I tried to talk to them and stuff like that. But my friendship group was a really amazing place. And I always remember, for an example, it's not nasty, but it hurt. So I remember being at break, and all my friends, girls and boys, they were all talking, and they were like, if you could create the perfect boy out of everybody, who would it, for what aspect of everybody? I'll choose his hair, his eyes, his mouth, his smile. And I always got, we'll choose Jono's fashion sense. And I always got clothes. And I was like, at first I was like, yeah, that's cool, I'll take that. But then it hurt. I was like, for once, I wanted to be the eyes. I wanted to be the smile. I wanted to be that. I even remember being on a school trip. One of the lads fell asleep, and all the girls like, don't he look so cute and stuff like that. We're talking about him while he was sleeping. So then I pretended to fall asleep, and nobody said anything about me. And I'm listening out, please somebody say something about me. And nobody did. So there were no malice there. It just didn't happen.
And during those next few years, was the kind of anxiety around relationships still present?
It became bigger.
It
became bigger in college. I did sports science at college. Wanted to be a PE teacher originally. Did some work experience at my old high school. And, there were elements of that where I absolutely loved teaching the older kids. Not the best at football by any means, but teaching the older kids some football stuff, absolutely loved. But then the younger kids who hadn't seen me before, they're making a couple of comments. I was like, being a school teacher, that's not for me. I can't do that.
Right.
So then I had this ambition of being a physiotherapy, going into sports science, looking at the biomechanics of the body and the way it moves. I was like, okay, we can do something with that. But like the first couple of months, like, this is kind of exciting, this sports science stuff. But then relationships came round, and then cliques are forming, and the popular guys established, the most attractive guys established. And again, I didn't have a place all of a sudden. And then the things that I did at high school, the stupid, the pranks, and it kind of didn't work in college. And I was still drinking. I was still drinking a lot. That was definitely a coping mechanism.
So beyond just socialised drinking, it was kind of something you were doing to cover over how you felt a little bit?
It helped. I would go out with my friends. We'd go to bars and clubs and stuff like that when I was 18, 19. And I found them so intimidating that I'd spend more time hiding away in the shadows, in the toilets. I would leave early. I would disappear. And I found going out around town at 17, 18, 19 was something that I so wanted to do. And I did it often with my friends, and I hated it as much. The turning on the lights at the end terrified me. I used to hate that. Going into a takeaway at the end of the night, bright lights, last chance to pull. Nobody went for me, and I hated it. Like these drunken people aren't going for me. I'm like, I hated it. I hated it so much. I'd walk home. The darkest of thoughts started to take over. There's a song, John Denver, Country Roads, Take Me Home to a place where I belong. I wanted to be taken away from this world. And when I talk about death and ending my life, I always wanted to be involved in a car accident, or I just wanted something to happen to me that would end my life. And I was struggling still, and the main source of it was being unattractive to other people, and I started thinking about my birth parents even more. There was still that hate, there was still that anger. I still had no outlets. There's now alcohol involved, which made things so much worse. College was tough, really.
You know, one of the things we've been talking about is the issues you had around relationships and your feelings towards them. When did that end? When did you have your first relationship, and how did that come about?
My first relationship was... So I would drink on a weekend, and Sunday I would be hungover, and I would be even more depressed than the following day. Alcohol when I'm low, alcohol is not for me. And what I would do, I went through this period of getting mobile phone. I was desperate. I was desperate for intimacy. I was desperate for affection. I was desperate for somebody to find me attractive.
How old are you at this age, sorry?
16, 17.
Still 16, 17, okay.
I've gone on to 17 years old. I'm at college. I would take a phone number and I would change the last 2 digits and I would ring it. If a guy answered, I would hang up. If a girl answered, I would say, "Oh, sorry, I'm after my sister. I think I've dialed the wrong number. I'm sorry." And I'd put the phone down. I would then text them saying, "Oh, I liked your accent. Where's your accent from? Do apologise about that. My mistake. Where's your accent from?" 99 times out of 100, didn't get anything back. "Oh, please delete this number." One day, somebody replied, "I'm from down south. Where are you from?" And I replied, and within 2 weeks, we were texting and calling each other.
Wow.
Every day. I told her I loved her. And then I told my mum, that I was staying at a friend's house, and I came down south on my own. Nobody knew where I was. Nobody knew where I was going to meet this person. Ultimately, I didn't know anything about this person. I didn't care what happened to me. I just went for it.
That was like the objective.
That was the objective. Yeah. And this girl was saying, she loved me. And
had you exchanged photos at this point?
So this was before picture messing had started. So I sent a photo of my friend in my friendship group. He had a girlfriend. He played football for the local football team. All the girls fancied him. I wanted to be him. So I sent a photo of him saying that was me. So I came down south, got on a 6-hour bus and then a local train. I remember picking up some flowers, not even thinking about what she was actually going to do when she saw me. I got there. She rang me up. I'm at the train station. She rang me up. She's like, "Where are you?" And I'm stood with these flowers and I'm like, "I'm here." And I walk over to her, like under the railway lines and onto the platform. And she's like, she's looking at me, and I can't make eye contact with her, looking at the floor. We get in a dad's car. So I'm now in a stranger's car, 8 hours away from home.
Yeah.
Nobody knew where I was, just going to their house. And I trusted them, and I just trusted them. And it was a quick introduction to the family once we got to her house, and we ended up going to her room. And she was like, look at me, look at me, look at me. And I looked at her and she was like, why didn't you tell me? And I was like, you wouldn't have met me if I told you I showed you what I looked like. And but I told her all sorts. I told her I had a job. I told her I played rugby. There was just lie after lie after lie because she wouldn't want to see the real me. But that was the first time I had sex. And I don't want to go too much into this relationship because it was a very... I people pleased in the relationship and I didn't have any boundaries in the relationship. And I did think a lot of things that I consented to do, but ultimately I didn't want to do them. But I did it because I had somebody I thought that found me attractive.
But what did she say? When you said you wouldn't have met me if I'd told you or if I'd shown you a photo or whatever, what was her response?
She didn't care. Like,
wow.
She was just like, oh, I'm not like that. And she wasn't, she was a kind person. She had a lot of stuff going on in her life herself. But it was a very it was two people who were really struggling in life in a relationship. Yeah.
Did it last for long?
I celebrated my 18th birthday during this period, and I remember none of my friends, or very few of my friends, came to my 18th birthday party. And that's something that really, really saddens me, because that support network that I've had ever since I was a kid, and I've still got now, they weren't there for such a big occasion, celebration in my life. And I was just obsessed with this relationship, and yeah, I lost all my friends, and she broke up with me. I think it was almost a year, 17 to 18, over my 18th birthday, and she broke up with me, and I just cried. And ultimately, it was one of the best things that ever happened. Like, that relationship ending was huge for me. After the aftermath, I isolated myself and I drank even more. And I was like, if I failed in that relationship and I people pleased and I dropped all my boundaries and I went to the other side of the country to seek that relationship, how am I going to move on from this? But thankfully, my friends came back and picked me up. And as I say, 19 to 20, the trajectory of what you see today started.
Something I've heard you say before, which I remember really stayed with me, was, I can't remember where it was written specifically, but you talked about a reason that the hospital, I think, had written a document for the reason that the birth parents had left you in the hospital. And when was it that you actually read that document?
That document that I read was when I was 24, and the opening lines are, Jonathan was born on the 31st of the 10th, 1984. Both parents were horrified by the child's appearance. Both parents felt no maternal bond. Both parents left the hospital 36 hours later, leaving the child behind. And when I was in college, obviously I didn't have those words. I was forming the pieces. I was creating the answers. And at that point, they left me because I looked different. They left me because I looked like this. And it destroyed me. And again, that vulnerability and me not caring about my life and what happened to me really started to take over.
That thing you've just described, it just seems like such a cold way to write it, even from the professional person who wrote it, who must have thought that at some point the child might have ended up reading it. It's just such a unpleasant way to write that situation out.
I've got so much paperwork, and the language is terrible. It's 1980s. And one part, it says, we must remember that Jonathan is a child and not a medical investigation. And I was like, as if you need to write that.
Yeah. You'd said that you had anger towards your parents before reading it. So after reading it, what was the feeling?
So the one thing that I'm really, really proud about when it comes to my birth parents is that I approached them when I was in a good place.
Yeah.
So 18 to 20 was definitely my darkest period. And then 20, they saw, that was the start of the Jonathan that you see today when I was 20 years old. And then there was a 4-year period of growth and healing. And all of a sudden, I was becoming my authentic self. And my mum was very much, she'd always been there, but she was still, it was now, I was open to her to talk. My friendships was there and I was talking to them. I was in a healthy relationship. I had a job. I was in a very, very good place and I was very well supported. And when I thought about my birth parents at 24, I thought, oh, I want to let them know that I'm okay. And so I got in touch with an adoption agency and she sat down with me and she spoke to me how I was feeling and what my thoughts were towards my birth parents. And together we decided to reach out to my birth parents to let them know that I was okay and that I was open to meeting them. So the lady called Chris at the adoption service, she first read my adoption report and she was like, it's not a nice read, Jono. And from what I've read, I don't think this is going to be a positive outcome for you, but I'll support you however you want to do this. And I read it and it hurt, but I thought, that's all them years ago and I still want to try. So we did, and we sent them that letter. But yeah, a few weeks later, we got a letter back and it simply said, regarding this subject, we do not wish any contact and further attempts will be ignored. And both my birth parents had signed it. And it hurt. I've always struggled with rejection. And I'm even on the spot as I've received that news, I'm sticking up for my birth parents. I found I've done that as I've got older, and they've done what they needed to do. They made that decision all them years ago, and they've stuck by it. They've gone on and had the family of their own. So I'm glad that what happened to me didn't prevent them from having a family. And I'm like looking at my mum and I'm like, look, I've got you. And then my girlfriend at the time, she was angry. She was like, how have they even rejected you again? That's not on. And then I find myself sticking up for my birth parents again. And it was very weird. When I look back, it was a mixture of emotions. And I was hurt and I was protecting them. And I was sticking up for them and I was explaining to people and it was very weird. And now I've kind of stripped it all back. And the truth is, the only thing I know about my birth parents is they gave me life. They brought me into this world and it's down to me to live this life and make the most of this life. And it's a beautiful life now anyway. So for that, I'm forever blessed. And it's, yeah, definitely been a roller coaster with them.
It's amazing that you can get to that place. It's really, really admirable. Because even as someone that, doesn't know you beyond chatting for a few hours, it's like you hear something like that and you just have so many questions and you just, how, why, and it's amazing that you can be so, thoughtful and kind is how it feels to go through that thought process and come out the other side to find the positives on both of them. Do you think you'll ever try again, or is that you done with your birth parents now? That's
me done. I'll always be open to it, but I'll have to let them come to myself. I'm going to respect their wishes, and for me, that's done. As I have got older, I do meet young children with Treacher Collins, and recently, this year, in fact, we've had 2 new babies born in Leeds with Treacher Collins, and I met both of those families, the child and the mum and dad. And every time I do that, I find that when it comes to family and birth parents, I find there's a bittersweet emotion going on that I'm so proud that they're all together and they're doing it, and it's shit. Like, some of the stuff that they have to go through is just awful. Like, they've nearly lost the babies on a couple of occasions, but they've still been there throughout it, and there's a love there for them, and I'll think about my birth parents, and every now and again there's a little, it creeps in. Mm-hmm. Why couldn't my birth parents stuck with that, you know? And it passes. Thankfully, it passes. And I'm also very aware as well. I don't know if I'll ever have children of my own, but if I do have my own children, there's a possibility my feelings may change towards my birth parents then. So, you know, this is not a closed thing, no. And I'm still healing, and there's still work to be done, but I'm in a very good place with it. And I definitely realised as well, as a teenager, when I was so angry towards them, that anger just consumed me and destroyed me ultimately. And now that I've replaced that with healing, positive thoughts, genuine positive thoughts, and facts. Like, the only thing I know about my birth parents, I don't know what they felt. I don't know what words were said. I don't know all their actions. I know they created me. So that definitely gives me a positive mindset.
As the varied and complex guests of our podcast show, life is different for everyone, and it doesn't come with a user manual. New situations and challenges can produce complex thoughts and emotions, anything from getting a new job to joining a new friendship group or having a baby. Therapists are trained to help you deal with these feelings and emotions, giving you tools on how to work with them and see you come out the back of a situation feeling stronger and more confident, and more aware of what's going on inside your mind. BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's easy and convenient, as it's all online. Where and when I grew up, therapy wasn't really something people did, certainly not me or my friends. I only came across it in later life when a really good friend of mine said he'd started taking it. This came as a surprise, as I had no idea, but he said he'd been doing it for stress at work and it had been really, really helpful, and that I should try it. So I did, and it was really helpful. It was great having an impartial and non-judgmental person listen to me talk about my problems and give me solutions and ways to deal with them in and out of the session. I'd recommend it to anyone personally, and it's something I think can help you with the little things as well as the big things. As the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/minuteswith. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/minuteswith.
I mean, it's an amazing explanation of how you've processed all that information. It's like really inspirational to hear. It was one of the big things on the previous video we did, you know, which genuinely had an unbelievable response. I always advise people not to read internet comments for whatever, because, you know, but the comments on your video, I don't know whether you looked or not, but they were incredibly positive. Like, it was quite overwhelmingly positive. And if there was negative aspect to them, it was all centered around the actions of the birth parents. Yeah. I think that was something that a lot of people just struggled to understand. But like you say, nobody knows but them. We don't know what the situation was, what had been discussed.
Yeah. I read all the comments.
Do you?
I promise you, I read all the comments. And one of the things that makes me smile as well is I've been exposed to a lot of trolls on social media. So I'm a little hypersensitive when it comes to comments. And so I will read. It's like knowing his power and control. Yeah. And it's amazing to see when we did the interview and all those comments, there was nothing but love there. And I absolutely loved feeling that. It was amazing to experience. And then I would still stick up for my birth parents. You know, I know there's going to be questions why, how can they do that the second time as well? And I get that. But yeah, just know that I'm in a good place.
I'm pleased that you read the comments. I'm pleased that you felt good about it. That's good to hear. Yeah. So we got I'd just like to jump back a little bit. But what I was going to do is talk about the reflex bit, and then wanted to get into the change, and then get into love my face.
Yeah. So I started working at Reflex, and there were two things that happened at Reflex. I met a guy, mountain of a man, came into the bar, head to toe in tattoos, muscles coming out of muscles that I didn't even know existed. And he came in and he stood right in front of me with his money, £20 note, stared at me everywhere I went. And I looked at him and I thought, oh, he's going to say something to me. He's going to make my night a living nightmare. I got into, when I was serving people's drinks, I was a terrible barman. You definitely didn't want to come to me. If anybody asked for a cocktail, I would make it up. I would charge the wrong prices. I was terrible. So I'm looking at, I still can't pour a pint. So I look at my feet and I'm serving people their drinks, and I hated eye contact. And it gets to this guy and I'm like, what would you like to drink? And he's like trying to get eye contact with me, and he's like, hold up, mate. Well, what happened to your face? I hated talking about my face. I'm like, sorry, mate, what do you want to drink? It's busy. What do you want to drink? It's like, no. What's happened to your ears? What's happened to your eyes? What's happened? And I was like, oh, I'm born like this. And he's like, all right, okay. What's that in your head? Pointing to my hearing aid. And I was like, it's an hearing aid. And he's like, can you take it out? They're like, yeah, I can take it out. And he's like, well, when you take it out, what can you hear? I can't hear anything, mate. And this guy, he's like, oh, you're so lucky. And I was like, here comes a joke, here comes an insult. And I was like, why? And he was like, I'd love to be deaf, mate. I'd love to be able to pick and choose when I can and can't hear. And I was like, why? And he's like, I've got a wife at home and she's so frigging loud. As soon as she walks in from work, it's like somebody's put some Duracell batteries in her and she just go. She don't come up for air. And I'm like, we're going to be divorced. She's so frigging loud, she does my nutting. And I laughed and I was like, I do that with my mum. When my mum's having a go at me, I turn my hearing aid off. When a teacher were having a go at me at school, I turn my hearing aid off and I don't listen to him. Like my own little moments of peace whenever I want. And he was like, oh, you're so lucky. And then something amazing happened. He held out his hand and he's like, what's your name? I was like, it's Jono. I shook my hand. He's like, what do you want to drink? Bought me a drink. We cheersed and off he went into the night. Like, nice to meet you. Have a good night. And off he went. And in that moment, I'd realised that I'd got him so wrong. I thought he was going to make fun of me. I thought talking about my experiences and my face were a negative thing. And I stood back and all these people that are laughing and talking, I was like, oh, I actually don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
And I'd like to think I'm the centre of the universe and this is the biggest thing in the world, but it's not that. This is my thing. I've got my insecurities about that, but everybody else has got something going on and they're just out living their life. So that guy changed my life forever. And in a single moment, our lives can change just like that. And that was definitely one of them. A girl started working in the bar. Loved Morrissey, the Smiths, Radiohead, did ballet. She just kind of floated around the bar and I just fancied the pants off her. I stayed away because why would she be interested in me? And one night she came up to me, she's like, Jono, do you fancy going out for a drink sometime? And I will, after the guy in the bar, I kind of started staying, working in the bar. And so I was like, yeah, you should join us. We're all going out. And she was like, no, just me and you.
Wow.
And her papa wanted to play it cool, but I was like, I'm free Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. When do you want to make this happen? So we agreed to meet the following day. That night, I'm like, what's a motive? I still had that. And I still think I do have what's a motive in it. And that morning, again, shit dodgy haircut, bowl cut, new clothes, and off I went to meet her. We agreed to meet at the local dam, and I gets there, clapped out, dropped down Renault Clio, blacked out windows, like again, anything to try and be cool. And is she going to arrive? Is she going to turn up? Is she going to be asking for my mate's number? What's the motive? She turns up, we walk around this dam, and it was one of the first times where I laughed, I cried, I talked about happy things, I talked about sad things, and she's doing the same thing as well. And every time we brushed, there was like a spark there, and I was like, ooh, I like this. It got cold, wet, and she's like, do you fancy going back to mine? I was like, okay, steward at Diggs. So gets in Cleo, picks up a cheap bottle of red wine, vegetarian curries, go back to hers, and I remember sitting on a bedroom floor drinking this wine and eating this vegetarian curry. And it was like the best day ever for me. I'm like, this is amazing. And then she starts choosing her words and being careful with her words. And when I know people are being careful with her words, she's wanting to talk about my face, but they're not wanting to offend me or upset me. And then in that moment when she's been careful with her words, I'm like, oh, this ain't cool, this ain't sexy, this isn't a date, it's my time to go. And she's like, Jono, I find myself staring at you all the time. And again, the word staring, I thought that was a negative thing. But again, before I had a chance to say anything, she's like, I just love your face, innit? And she leans in and she kisses me. And in that moment, in that kiss, I went from feeling unlovable to thinking I was the sexiest guy in the world in a single moment. And I talk about, I was like, you changed my life in that moment. And she's like, shut up, you were just a boy that I fancied. And I don't know, and I was like, that's exactly it. I was just a boy that you fancied. That was huge for me. So from then on, the trajectory's just gone on and on and on. And yeah, started to find, it helped that other people were finding things that they loved about me. And now I've started exploring those things that I love about myself.
And it's amazing that you could take all those years of frustration, anxiety, maybe bitterness, and in a very quick moment of time, turn it all around and start pointing yourself in a different direction. It
was a few year period.
Sure.
Gotta admit. I mean, from that, I left the working in a bar. I ended up working in a gym. And I was still struggling with my appearance. Even though there were positives going on in my life, I was still struggling with my appearance and I still hated my reflection. Well, what happens when people go to the gym is they can use the weights, but they can't put them back.
Right, okay.
It's a known fact that they can't put the weights back. So 21-year-old Jonathan with his little sparrow legs has to put them away at the end of the shift. So one night, I'm putting all the weights away and I look at my trainers. I've just got ceiling to floor mirrors, looking at my trainers, and I'm like, oh, I like my new trainers. Look at my little sparrow legs in my short shorts. I was like, hey, I've done legs. Looking, got a nice little bit of a pump on them. Look at my butt. I was like, I've got a cute butt. Skin tight shirt on. I was like, oh, okay, pushing my chest out. And I'm on a roll. I like my trainers, my legs, my butt, my chest. And I always stopped at my shoulder right when I was looking in a mirror. But this day on that roll, I looked at my face. I'm 21 years old. And I look at my face. And instead of wanting to push my eyes up, I smiled. And I noticed when I smiled, I only have one dimple. And I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. And like for the first time in, I can't remember how many years, I absolutely loved what I saw. And that was a game changer, absolutely game changer. And to be able to not have to hide from my reflection was huge, absolutely huge. And again, finding more things that I love about myself as well as that one dimple, the list has continued and grown.
It's such a nice visual. You can really picture what you're describing there in the gym, like working your way up. It's great. And obviously you've then gone on to help other people with accepting what might be difficult to accept. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So on this trajectory, I started to read magazines and articles, and we're still appearance obsessed. And I was like, I want to challenge that. I remember reading a fashion article or a magazine, and it had the circle of shame on it, and it was circling celebrities with wrinkles, with cellulite, and I was like, oh, this is horrible. And at the end of this magazine, I was like, have you got a story to tell? I was like, yeah, I do. So I shared my story with this magazine about how I loved my face and how society did make that difficult, and this magazine and this article makes that difficult. You know, we've all got our unique stamps, and they should be celebrated. This article went out. I started doing some TV work for various TV people, And then a school got in touch, asked me to share my story in front of the entire school. And I was like, okay, let's do this. So I went down to this school, all these kids in their little uniforms. I was bricking it. I was proper nervous, stood in front. And then all these little people sat coming in, and there's like 500 of them, all crammed in, sat cross-legged staring at me. I hated it. Bottom lip started to quiver. I started to talk. Dropped my hearing aid. But I somehow bumbled through this assembly talking about self-love and celebrating who you are. And they all gave me a round of applause at the end and sang me a hymn. And I was like, that's sweet. But they're just doing it to be nice. Went out from a taxi, school bell went, and it was playtime for them. And then some kids came over to me and like, Jono, can we see your hearing aid? And I was like, yeah, okay. So I showed them, can we see your Bart Simpson ears? So I showed them my ears. And then more kids start going, do you want to play football with us? And then like, oh, Jono, I get bullied because I've got freckles. People say that these kids started opening up to me. And I was like, I don't know what's happening right now, but I know I need to do more of it. So it grew, and I was like, okay, let's do more of this. A family with a little girl with Treacher Collins reached out. She's like, Jono, we would love for you to meet our daughter. And I was like, that's what I needed when I was younger. If I had have met somebody like myself with a bit of positivity, that would have done me the world of good. And that saying, be who you needed when you were younger, is something that I absolutely love and kind of live by now. So I met this little girl called Eloise. And again, it was a moment that like, I need to do more of this. But as I became more popular, people from all over the world started reaching out. Jono, can you meet? We're in Australia, we're in New Zealand, we're in America. Can you come and see us? So again, I worked, saved up, bought myself a plane ticket and went to see them. And wherever there was a family, I went and saw them. And I couldn't do that. It was impossible to maintain as an individual. So sat down in a pub with my friends up in Yorkshire. And that guy who got me the job in the bar, who I once pushed away, he was like, why don't you start your own charity up? And I was like, I don't know how to do that. And then my other friends were like, yeah, let's do it. So I was like, okay. And then we set up the Love Me, Love My Face Foundation. And we support children all over the world with facial differences. We fund medical surgeries, medical supplies. And our biggest, we go into schools talking about anti-bullying and acceptance to everybody. But one of the best things that we do is I'm able to meet them, but we also have them meet each other. So this year, we had 15 families in the UK, all with Treacher Collins from Ireland, from Scotland, from Wales, all parts of England. They all come, they all hung out, and you've got newborns and you've got adults, you've got teenagers, all various stages of life just sharing and interacting. We had a dads only workshop where all of a sudden all these dads that have just gone through something similar on different stages are opening up. You've got the mums talking to one another, then you've got the siblings of these affected children talking about, and they're all just relating, and it's so powerful. But for somebody to see another person that just looks like them and realizes they're not the only one, is so empowering and so life-changing. So the Love Me, Love My Face Foundation, done with my friends that I've known since I was school, that were always there, is pretty incredible, and very proud of that.
It's amazing, Jono, it's amazing. Actually, when you were talking there, I was kind of quiet because I felt my throat go a little bit, but I'm better now, so I'm going to carry on.
The work that I've been doing on myself recently, and something that I love about myself, is that in the past I've really, really struggled with rejection. I was rejected from day one, and it's something that I've had to work on. So I did some work on my inner child, and I spent time with little Jono, who went through all that rejection and all that crap. And I kept on I had to visualize him, and we went on a road trip together. And on this road trip, I kept on telling little Jonathan, yes, we've experienced rejection, but we have attracted so many amazing people, so many amazing connections, opportunities, And that will continue if you embrace all that you are. And it's true for every single one of us. So, yeah, embrace who you are and good stuff will come. So, yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much.
Those are lovely closing words as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jono. I'm going to shake your hand again.
No, absolutely.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Specifically, I guess what I mean, I'd hate to say what I'm known for. It's not like an achievement on my CV. But last time I was here, speaking about the time I was kidnapped by the Taliban, but it's a bit like saying, getting run over by a bus is an achievement. But
Sure, okay, I understand that.